Thank you all for your time, for being here on this very important topic that we know that we're going to take up in the General Assembly in January. So thank you for your comments today ahead of time.
Mr. Chair, we're live. I got notice from OIS that we're live.
There we go. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this House Ways and Means Education Subcommittee briefing on learning and teaching through virtual education. My name is Alonzo Washington. I am the state delegate for District 22 in Prince George's County and chair of the subcommittee and vice chair of the Ways and Means of the House Ways and Means Committee. The COVID-19 pandemic has drastically changed how we administer education across the state of Maryland. The 900,000 plus students in our state have had to adapt to a starkly different learning environment that has posed many obstacles. Our special education students and English language learners have especially struggled to adapt. The goal of this briefing is to get a better understanding of the challenges and successes of virtual learning and teaching so far in the state of Maryland. We have some excellent advocacy groups with us here today who will give us professional insight into the best practices and what we can do to improve educational outcomes during this pandemic. We will also hear from several members of the general public who will testify to their own experience of virtual learning. I want to thank the members of the Education Subcommittee for being here today and look forward to another excellent briefing. We will first hear from Ms. Mondi Kumba Frazier. She's the director of the Black and Brown Coalition for Education, Equity, and Excellence. Thank you for being here, Ms. Frazier.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to the chairman, Delegate Washington, and members of the Education Subcommittee. My name is Mondi Kumbula Fraser, and I'm the director of the Black and Brown Coalition for Educational Equity and Excellence. Thank you for inviting me to share my insight regarding the disparate impacts of virtual learning on our children. Next slide. The coalition was formed by Identity Inc. and the Montgomery County chapter of the NAACP, and it is an advocacy organization committed to achieving educational equity for Black, Brown, and low-income students. Next slide. So the coalition has 5 advocacy asks, and they are related to increasing access to rigorous academic classes for Black and Brown students, also increasing the number of effective and diverse teachers, increasing the number of effective and diverse principals, and also related to accelerated learning in order to close the reverse of learning loss due to the pandemic and address pre-existing opportunity gaps, and then also providing culturally and linguistically appropriate engagement to underserved students. Next slide. I think there's some animation on my slide, so that's why it takes a little bit of time. So the pandemic and underserved families. Prior to the pandemic, there were already pre-existing barriers to educational equity that existed and were just exacerbated as a result of the pandemic. So the disparities certainly widened as a result of the pandemic and virtual learning. The reality is that Black and Brown families have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic and are at higher risk of infection, of death, of income loss, job loss, food insecurity, housing loss, lack of technology access, and also lack of Wi-Fi and more. And all of this has a direct impact, of course, on learning for children, because it's difficult to learn if you're hungry, if you're homeless, if you are taking on adult responsibilities because you have a family member or a parent who's lost a job, and you are now trying to work full-time or caring for your siblings while you're trying to do online learning, or you are assisting your younger siblings with virtual learning as well while you're trying to complete your studies. Next slide. So the Black and Brown Coalition partnered with the University of Maryland's School of Public Health to conduct a study that was called Securing Educational Equity, Learning from the Lived Experiences of Black, Brown, and Low-Income Children During the COVID-19 Pandemic. And we interviewed educators, parents, and students alike to assess the impact of the pandemic and virtual learning on Black and Brown families. The first set of findings had to do with adult support. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but the reality is that children are missing that social emotional connection with adult role models that they have at school, including their teachers and their guidance counselors and their coaches who have provided them with support. A good teacher can tell when a child walks into the room whether they're having a hard time and perhaps can cajole them into a good mood or provide some type of emotional assistance if needed. And also you can tell which children are struggling and who can kind of hide in the classroom, but on Zoom, it's very difficult to do. A lot of children turn their cameras off or may not even feel comfortable sharing their background due to their home circumstances as well. So students need that more constant interaction. Also, a lot of children are experiencing severe isolation, which has a negative impact on their mental health, as well as their social and emotional well-being. And we've also heard from high school seniors, many of whom are the first in their families to go to college, who need help from guidance counselors in navigating those college applications, scholarship applications, financial aid applications, because they may not have adult support at home that can help them navigate through those challenges. Next slide. The next set of findings had to do with communication. And there are some in the underserved communities who have had difficulty managing expectations and deadlines and requirements and technology due to the virtual learning. There have been requests from those that we spoke to in our study for more frequent communication and to have that communication translated into different languages other than English. Otherwise, if you're not being inclusive in your communications, then you have certain parents who are not able to assist their children with virtual learning. It's also important to realize that not every family, and especially in some of our immigrant communities, has an email address, has ever even been online before. So you want to be able to communicate in different ways, including those text messages, the phone calls, sending things actually in the hard copies in the mail, but also translating them into different languages as well. So we do recommend that you have the check-ins from school staff, those teachers, those guidance counselors, the coaches. Just call. Maybe they have a list each week, a certain number of families that they call. That way, if you have families who are disengaged or feeling left behind or encountering challenges with technology or need assistance with mental health and other issues, they may not have the wherewithal to reach out to you. They may not know to reach out to you. They may be struggling and may not have the capacity to do so. But if you have those regular check-ins, it can make a difference. Next slide. We also talked about, if you go back one slide for me, thank you, about resources as well. And families have talked about issues with technology. In some counties, and in my county, Montgomery County, it's a blessing that they do provide a Chromebook for every child, but there are other places where that does not happen. So you have people who do not have the technology, their computers to assist the children. In addition, you may have some, if they do have access to the technology, if it gets broken and maybe they don't feel comfortable reporting it. If you have maybe in some places where they don't have a Chromebook or something for every child, imagine if you are a parent, and which came up in our study, we had one mom who had 5 children and 1 computer. And if that's the case, then you are making a decision every day as to which child is going to get educated that day, because it can't be all of your children. So it's really important when we think about the social, emotional, and psychological impact of the pandemic and the spike in the mental health resources and increased incidents, and this is of parents, teachers, and students alike, of stress and depression and anxiety, that those are addressed. Also, we recommend having more frequent food distribution times for working parents, and to take into consideration that due to social distancing of the pandemic, a bus ride for families who don't have cars to go and pick up food, which ordinarily may take 30 minutes, could end up taking a couple of hours because the buses aren't running as frequently and some bus routes no longer exist. Next slide. So when we talk about things that can possibly assist with the challenges to virtual learning for underserved families, there's the establishment and maintenance of low-cost educational learning hubs, which is very helpful. We're on target to establish 66 in the Montgomery County area by January. We talk about intensive one-on-one academic support, otherwise known as high dosage tutoring or high impact tutoring. And that would be every day, all year, and to target the children who have suffered the most with learning loss. Also, the possibility of extending instructional time by extending the school day, the school week, the school year, and thinking about children who really have had the most learning loss. And of course, I mentioned earlier, helping your high school seniors and providing resources for parents for training, because they are mini teachers with the virtual learning, and they have to partner with them as well. Next slide. And then we talk about advocacy for culturally appropriate engagement. What our study really showed us was the importance of learning from the lived experiences of underserved Black, Brown, and low-income families. So not everyone has the same circumstances. You want staff that is culturally appropriate, that is linguistically competent, can kind of, like I mentioned, translate some of those documents into other languages, having that two-way system of communication so that people realize that they can still communicate with you, even if it's not via email, it's the text messages and the phone calls, and really being inclusive if we really want to make sure that every single child really does have an opportunity to be successful, especially with the challenges of virtual learning. Next. Next slide. And there is my contact information in case you would like to contact me. And does anyone have any questions? And thank you for the opportunity to present.
No, thank you, and really appreciate it, Ms. Frazier, for the great information that you provided to us. Are there any questions? Please place it in the chat if you have any questions right now, or raise your hand if you have any questions. Okay, seeing no questions right now. If you can stand by for us, we'll come back to you just in case there's any questions later. Okay. All right, so our next presenters are going to speak on teacher preparation and best, I'm sorry, no, I apologize. We're going to go next to Dr. Allison Sokol, who's the policy director for the Education Trust.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Allison Sokol. I'm the acting director of the P12 policy team at the Education Trust. Thank you so much for having me today. It's really an honor. I'm always really grateful for the opportunity to speak about educational equity, and today in particular, because I'm a proud Maryland resident. My daughter will be a kindergartner at a Montgomery County public school next year, and so this is very near and dear to my heart. Next slide, please. Just for a little background, the Education Trust is a national nonprofit. We work to close opportunity gaps that disproportionately affect students of color and students from low-income families. Next slide, please. So I was asked to come speak to you about virtual learning, which of course I will, but I feel like it's important to take a step back to think about the state of opportunity and achievement that existed in Maryland before the pandemic. I'm so pleased at how aligned Mondi and my presentations are, which isn't surprising given that we've had the opportunity to work closely together. Over half of Maryland students are Black and Latino, and yet far fewer Black and Latino students are prepared for success compared to their white peers. Next slide. White students are more than twice as likely to meet or exceed expectations on fourth grade reading and Algebra 1 than both Black and Latino students. And this gap is actually bigger among higher income students. Next slide, please. Black and Latino students are also less likely to enroll in college within 1 year of graduation than their white peers. And again, we see this gap larger among higher income students. Next slide, please. This so-called achievement gap is really an opportunity gap because across many measures, we see that Maryland gives Black and Latino students the least of the resources and opportunities that matter most for their success. Next slide, please. This starts with funding. Most districts in Maryland don't receive the money that the state says they need, and districts with the most students of color are shortchanged the most. We see that racial disparities in academic preparation begin when kids are as young as my little ones are, before kindergarten. The state has a pre-K program, but it doesn't serve enough students yet, and there are steps to take to improve its quality. Students in schools with high percentages of students of color are twice as likely to have a teacher who's never taught in the classroom before than schools with low percentages of students of color. And we know that the educators in Maryland schools do not yet reflect the diversity of its students and families. We know that Black and Latino students are significantly underrepresented in advanced coursework, from gifted and talented in elementary school to 8th grade algebra to AP and IB in dual enrollment. And the data show us that Black students are 4 times as likely to be suspended out of school or expelled as white students. Next slide, please. There is a very real risk that without strategic action at every level, that inequitable opportunities to learn during this pandemic will exacerbate these inequities in Maryland. Next slide, please. So currently, or at least as of last week, all 24 school districts have all or some students learning virtually in an effort to keep students and families safe right now. And many are reassessing plans for hybrid or in-person learning due to an uptick in COVID cases. Next slide, please. And in order to succeed in a virtual learning environment, students need all of the things that Mondi just shared with us. They need access to their own device, reliable high-speed internet, access to technical support and repairs, and a safe and supportive space to connect to virtual learning opportunities. Unfortunately, in many communities, especially communities of color and low-income communities, students don't have access to the technological resources they need to connect to virtual learning. We actually don't have great statewide data on this, but the data that we do have paints a very stark picture. So nearly 200,000 Maryland homes lack internet access, and this is especially true in rural communities. Last May, a survey from the Department of Ed found that in 3 school districts, more than half of students reported not having access to the internet to access virtual learning. Of course, we hope that that has improved over the few months. And research and national data show that students of color and students from low-income families are much less likely to have access to devices and reliable high-speed internet, placing another barrier to learning. Next slide, please. We know that as important as connectivity is, it's really just the first step. Once students and families have what they need to learn remotely, research and experience show that strong relationships with caring adults and educators are critical to keeping students engaged and attending school. Even before the pandemic, 15% of Maryland students missed so much school that they were at risk of falling behind. And Black and Native students and students with disabilities were much more likely to be chronically absent. With so many students learning remotely, we're going to need schools and districts to do much more than ever before to ensure that students feel welcomed and supported and engaged so that they make the decision every day to log on to school. Next slide, please. So what can state leaders do? I could go on about this for much longer than the 5 to 10 minutes I was allotted, so I've narrowed it down to sort of 5 key things. The first is leveraging both purchasing power and partnering with businesses and internet providers to provide laptops and tablets and expanded internet service to students and teachers, especially in high poverty communities. There are many states that are setting a good example. California is one of them in this regard. The second one is providing grants with federal and state funds, particularly to high need districts, to increase their capacity to facilitate virtual learning. And by facilitate virtual learning, I'm referring to all of the things in Mondi's presentation, from connectivity to supports for students' social and emotional well-being, to ensuring that students have all of the materials and supports they need to be successful. The third is requiring districts to collect data. It's very hard to solve problems if we don't know they exist. And right now we actually know very little about what's going on with remote learning across our state. And requiring districts to collect consistent data about what learning model is in place right now, remote, hybrid, or in person, student attendance and engagement data, teacher attendance data, and to regularly report this data would be a huge step in the right direction. Connecticut actually just launched the Connecticut Department of Education just launched a really incredible dashboard where they're weekly reporting this data, including a map that shows districts where the gap for high needs students in their attendance from this year to this point last year is pretty big, in order to target resources to the districts that need it most in order to get all of their students engaged in learning. The fourth thing is to prioritize allocating federal stimulus funds to evidence-backed programs that aim to accelerate learning and address the unfinished instruction that is occurring during remote instruction. So this is intensive tutoring, summer programs, expanded learning day, extended school year, particularly in high needs districts and schools. And finally, to provide funding and guidance so that districts are able to deliver professional development to teachers and school leaders who were never prepared to teach in this way and never imagined that this would be the way that they were teaching. And also so that districts and school leaders can provide mental health supports to educators as they recover and work to support students' recovery from the pandemic. Next slide, please. Of course, these are all a first step to addressing the challenges posed by virtual learning, but as I started this presentation, there's much more work to be done in the state to address the underlying racial disparities in Maryland's education system. This starts with equitable funding, implementing a funding formula for Maryland schools that addresses race and class-based inequities, targets any new money to the schools and educators serving our students with the greatest needs, ensuring that all students have high quality and diverse teachers and leaders, making sure that our CTE programs are high quality, putting guardrails in place to ensure that all CTE programs and offerings give students the skills and qualifications they need to get in-demand jobs in the future, addressing disparities in access to rigorous coursework and ensuring that all high-achieving students are automatically enrolled into advanced courses and have the opportunity to take those rigorous course pathways that lead to college and career success. And finally, expanding early childhood and giving priority access to the students who need it most. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to conclude with a couple of resources, which I believe were made available, and if not, I'm happy to provide them to you. We work closely with the Maryland Alliance for Racial Equity in Education. These are their asks for implementing the Kerwin Commission's recommendations. Next slide, please. We recently launched at the Education Trust a suite of materials we're calling our state action guides on 7 issues that are really urgent in these times, with actions that state leaders can take to support districts and schools in advancing equity, one of which is on digital access. Next slide, please. And we also put together, in partnership with our colleagues at Digital Promise, a distance learning digital advocacy guide that focuses on what districts can do to support students during virtual learning. Next slide, please. And finally, here's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to talk more about what we can do in Maryland to make sure that every student is learning during these challenging times. And thank you for having me.
No, thank you. I thought that was a great presentation as well. And Ms. Frazier, I also want to thank you as well for the presentation. Again, I would just ask all the members, if you do have a question, to place it in the chat, or not place it in the chat, but let me know so I can call on you. If you do have a question, raise your hand. But I'm just going to ask the first question, Ms. Mondi. I hope you don't mind me calling you Ms. Mondi. I don't want to brutalize your last name.
That's okay.
So I apologize. But on your slide about the advocacy for cultural appropriate engagement, can you point to a LEA or local education agency that's doing this well, a local school system that's doing this well, in your opinion? And the slide just talks about training and evaluating all districts, school leaders on hiring for equity, as well as supporting and retaining cultural appropriate staff. also talks about just training staff about the appropriate use of language and being inclusive and having inclusive language too. So can you just speak to who does it the best?
Well, I wouldn't, since I'm, we focus on Montgomery County about who's doing it the best, but we could certainly talk about ways that, there need to be improvements in that particular area. I think that it's interesting because everyone, like we talked about, has your own lived experiences. So you just never quite think about what happens in other places. But one of the things that we certainly do recommend is as you put together some type of parent engagement plan, making sure that you are including people who are of different colors, who also are low income, so that you're really hearing their voices and you really are getting a chance to really let them weigh in on what happens and so that they're feeling engaged, because a lot of times those are the families who feel marginalized and who are not included. And that was one of the things that we learned from our study, is that often if you want to be able to hear their voices, you have to dig a little bit deeper. You have to give them a little bit more support. You have to maybe be the person to give the outreach, but it's really important to make sure that their voices are heard.
Got it. No, thank you for that. And Ms. Sokol, can you just answer this question for me? What do you think is you mentioned learning loss. What's the best method to measure learning loss of a student? And maybe obviously there could be different at each grade, right? So what's the best way to doing it, and how should we make sure that we're doing it consistently across our different school systems? You're muted. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, definitely.
Diagnostic assessments are critical for understanding where students are at. They're critical for teachers to know what to teach, for school leaders to know how to support their educators, for parents who are wondering right now how their kids are doing and what they are learning, what they need help accelerating on. And at the Education Trust, we really do push for consistent statewide diagnostic assessments, because it allows the state to see across districts which districts are most in need of additional supports and resources to make sure that students catch up from whatever learning that they've missed while learning has been remote.
Thank you very much. Delegate, I'm gonna go Delegate Smith first, then Delegate Rose, and I'll come to you, Delegate Eversole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize for putting my question in the chat. I thought you had asked to do that, so my apologies. So I actually had two quick questions. The first one was for Ms. Sokol, as it pertains to, there was a bar graph where I think you noted that Black and Brown high schoolers were sometimes entering college at lower rates 1 year after the conclusion of high school. And I know that we're in the midst of probably collecting this type of data, but I didn't know if you had any anecdotal or any preliminary insight to the fact that people are receiving both 4-year and 2-year collegiate experiences largely online. And that could be creating a situation where people might wonder, do I want to spend that much money moving forward to begin college? Not saying you always want to, switch. It might be you just only want to achieve an associate's degree, but I wonder if this is also going to change desires around college affordability and access because of this moment. So I'll let you answer that before I ask another question.
So I don't unfortunately have Maryland specific data, but there was a report that came out from the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center in October, which showed that contrary, I think, to what everyone thought, which is what you expressed, that we would see actually a decline in enrollment in 4-year institutions because many students would choose or be forced to choose 2-year institutions, which are often more affordable. At least right now, what we're seeing is a huge decrease in enrollment in community colleges, which nationally we've seen a decrease of 23% in terms of community college enrollment. And I think that speaks to Mondi mentioned an ability of students to apply for financial aid, choices that families are, especially families who are disproportionately impacted by the health and financial impacts of the pandemic, the lack of options for right now for taking advantage of community college education.
No, that's interesting because I know that's overall data, because I know the average community college student is 29 years old, and there's a lot of other variables that make them look very different than the person who just graduated from high school. So I guess it would be interesting if you could tease out, that data based on just getting out of high school versus someone who maybe lost their job, has kids and are kind of the more traditional community college student that's a bit older. The only other question I had for you, Ms. Sokol, is you were discussing something that you said. Oh yes, you were talking about professional development training around the delivery of virtual education, because many people did not get trained on teaching in that manner. I guess I wanted to know, in terms of the best practices around that, how were they developed? Were they developed with a sense or a sensitivity rather to providing virtual education to lower income students, to students that have some of the challenges that we tend to associate with high need schools? Because, just delivering virtual education is one thing, but delivering it in a context with sensitivity to some of those other things, I'm just wondering if the best practices were developed with that population even in mind.
So we're hesitant to use the phrase best practices because best practices come about from years of research and experience, and we've never been in this situation before. So we tend to talk about promising practices or things to look for, because really everyone's sort of, what is the phrase, building the plane as they're flying it. But yes, I would say that in an ideal situation, teachers would get, the lowest hanging fruit would be making sure that all teachers know how to teach virtually, use whatever platforms and learning management systems the district is asking them to use. And at this point, given how long students have been learning virtually, we hope that most schools and districts have gotten to that point, though that's not necessarily the case. But yes, the next step would be supporting teachers and thinking about how to differentiate instruction. How do you use a virtual learning platform? How do you structure your time to ensure that the students who are most in need of one-on-one or small group support, either academically or because that is how you're going to ensure that they stay engaged and continue to participate, how do you structure that time and how do you reach those students?
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question.
Delegate Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for your presentation. One of the slides I was most interested in as far as collecting data, and it mentioned teacher participation. And I know overall, beyond, I guess, some of the certain populations, but statewide overall, and I know in Carroll, we being a rural community, we have a lot of kids that do not have access to good internet either. And we are having a real problem with a lot of our kids falling behind, whether they be in low income or not. Overall, as a county, it's a real challenge. And so when you were talking about collecting data about teacher participation, here in our county, we're having an issue with teachers who didn't want to come back when we went to the hybrid. Everybody's trying to figure this out. And I understand, like you said, we're figuring this out as we're flying the plane. However, we couldn't even bring high school students back until last week. And now here we are today, going back to nobody in school. So can you please speak to how important it is, because we had to get into a situation where we had to hire lots and lots of substitutes who are not trained teachers. And can you just speak to how important it is to have our actual trained teachers not taking leave and teaching our kids, be it virtual or not virtual? Can you just speak to that? Because I just have a great concern, since March, we're losing so much time with our students. And I fear, how long is it going to take for us to recover from this across the board, throughout the entire state? And, we always talk about in our committee, and I do appreciate that so much, how much we want everybody to be on the same level playing field. Can you just speak to that, please?
Delegate Rose, is that question for me or for Mondi?
Anyone who wants to take it.
Well, I can start.
I'll answer it for anyone. So no, I'm joking. Go ahead.
I think when I mentioned teacher attendance data, I was thinking about the fact that there's actually data that suggests that not all teachers have access to reliable internet, particularly educators in rural communities, and that teachers are having to juggle, this is very personal to me because I have two little ones, their own childcare challenges and caring for other family members, and that this particularly impacts educators of color because communities of color are disproportionately impacted by everything that this pandemic has brought, health and financial impacts, and that without information at a bare minimum about participation, but actually what we'd want to see districts do is get more information about what are the actual challenges, lifting up the voices of teachers of their experiences so that districts are better able to support their educators and better able to structure virtual or hybrid learning in a way that makes teachers feel safe and supported and ready to come to work to help students learn.
And just as a follow-up, and I appreciate that, I would be interested in the data because we had such a large number. We had well over 300 teachers put in for leave. And, I don't know that they're all in that particular situation. And I'm not saying that my question is, if you're not in a situation, I would like to get that data because if there are situations where we can help support them, that's great, but we need to get our teachers back in the classroom because we need our kids to be taught across the board, however that looks, however that may be. But my concern is, and I'm sure everyone is very aware, there have been campaigns to kind of do a sick out and we're not going to come back and we want certain things. And my concern is I have great respect for the teaching profession and I have great respect for all of them. But we're in a situation where we have kids that need to be taught. We've been dealing with this since March. And if we're now going back to the full virtual, then we need to bring these teachers back. They need to be teaching in whatever way that looks and whatever supports we can give them. That's great, but we've got to do something because and I'm also concerned with our special needs kids. We're in a real bad situation. So I think in whatever ways we can encourage teachers to come back and teach, we need to not make this be some sort of battle because we've got kids who are really suffering. And so I'm concerned from anywhere from Baltimore City to Allegheny County and everywhere in between and on the shore, our entire state, our kids are really having a hard time. And I have great concerns with what we've lost and how we can make that up. So I do appreciate your presentation and I thank you for answering my question.
Thank you. And I just want to remind the committee that if you have a question, let's ask a question. I thought those were great thoughts, Delegate Rose, but I want to make sure we get to questions so that we have enough time and we don't get cut off at 4 o'clock today. Delegate Ebersol.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, there's real quickly responding to some of the comments I just heard. The equivalence of saying teachers need to come back to work in the same way that healthcare professionals do is a false equivalence because the situation in a school is not nearly as controlled as it is in a hospital or doctor setting. And so we really have to honor the teachers and their safety. And I worry that we, in our effort to get teachers back, that we have begun hiring substitutes just to get face-to-face. I'd love to put on a balance a qualified professional teaching online versus someone who is really just filling a gap and is substituting, but not really, they're unqualified. They don't really have the training. So we really have to watch our balance of just getting someone in front of students is a good idea, especially with regards to health, but also with regards to education. And thank you, Mr. Chair. I digressed a moment. I couldn't help it. And I see you smiling at me and that's good news. I do want to go to one of the slides, Dr. Sokol, that you had. It was in your 12th slide about ensuring that students in Maryland are connected and engaged. And in that, you talk about collecting consistent data. And even you responded to the chair's question about diagnosis. I'm always concerned because it says in there, for example, student attendance. Well, we can grab that, but then it also says student engagement. This is a difficult thing to hold on to. Our teachers haven't, and we're going to get to this, I know, our teachers haven't been trained to really have eyes on students online to tell if they're engaged or not. And that's something Dr. Kumbula Fraser got to also talked about, teachers' ability to observe students. And I worry not only that we won't get good data, but I also worry that we will become over-consumed with gathering that data. When I'm helping a grandchild online these days, and I realize how precious the teaching moments are, even more so than they were in person, when I can actually get a 5-year-old to settle down and listen to a math lesson. So my question is I do have a question, Mr. Chair. The question is how do you envision that data collection online? And do you have an idea of how you will get people to do it reliably and without impacting the education that exists?
So I'll start by saying that that really the folks who have the expertise in this are my friends at Attendance Works, and that if this is an area in which you're interested, I strongly encourage you to reach out to them, because they have been doing nothing but, they've been thinking about a lot of things, including this very issue. When we spoke with them actually recently, they talked about trying to capture more than just that a student has clicked or logged on. So that could include submission of assignments. It could include participation in certain activities. It could include, the participation or taking of some sort of assessments, just something that allows us to know more than whether the student just opened a window. It is a very difficult balance. I really do hear what you're saying, that we don't want to overburden our educators, and that we want to make sure we leave as much time as possible for teaching. But without information about whether students are actually engaged in learning versus logging on, it's often difficult for districts and teachers to figure out how to solve that challenge of students not engaging. But again, I'm happy to provide you with the contact information of Attendance Works, and they have developed some frameworks and have some working with some districts and states to help think about this challenge.
Good, and you pasted something in the comments. Is that it, or if you will, just when you have a moment, you can do it after your testimony. Type in the connection to them. I will copy.
Yes, I'll put Attendance Works contact information. What I put there in the chat is actually an example of the Connecticut State Department of Education's dashboard, where they're putting weekly reports. I actually don't believe they have engagement data right now. I think it's simply attendance data, as well as mode of learning and comparisons of attendance from this point, from now until to last year. But yes, I'll put the attendance.
If you paste it in there, I have it open. I'll copy it for myself. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Dr. Sokol and Ms. Kumbula Fraser, thank you, Kumbula Fraser. Thank you so much for your great presentations today and for the great information. We're going to take this to heart and really drive home, and we'll see what we can do to support our teachers and more importantly, support our families in this upcoming session. So thank you for the recommendations. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we'll go.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. So we'll go to our next presentation. This will be on teacher preparation and best virtual learning practices. We have Dr. Monica Simonson. She's the Education Program Director at the University of Maryland Global Campus. We also have Dr. Ebony Terrell Shockley, the Executive Director / Associate Professor with the University of Maryland College Park, Department of Teaching and Learning, Policy and Leadership. And lastly, we have Dr. Ryan Schaaf, who's an Assistant Professor at Notre Dame of Maryland University. Dr. Monica, you want to start us off?
Sure. It's Dr. Monica Simonson. It's fine.
Yes.
No, it's totally fine. Yes, and as you said, I am the Education Program Director at the University of Maryland Global Campus, so formerly UMUC. I appreciate the opportunity to join you and to hear from the previous speakers. I think I can probably speak for my colleagues when I say, as institutions of higher education, we're really looking forward to working collaboratively with local districts and states and the state and these other organizations to assess the needs, as we were just talking about, and then build capacity to make sure that all Maryland learners have access to high quality education, regardless of the modality of instruction. It looks like we're just getting up to my slides. That is, I think, the second one, but that's totally fine because that's where we're going. Oh, no, let's go. Yeah, let's go to this one. That's right. Just want to point out that at UMGC, we have multiple graduate programs focused on distance learning and instructional technology. But today, I'm going to wear the hat of the director of the Masters of Arts in Teaching for secondary education. So our students are bachelor's degree or have bachelor's degrees in content areas, and then they return to us to take online classes. We've been fully online since our inception to meet the secondary education certification requirements in Maryland before their full-time, typically in-person teaching internship. This fall, we have interns in 16 different Maryland districts, providing us with, I think, a unique perspective on the statewide disparities. Next slide, please. So we've talked about this quite a bit, so I'll try to move quickly through it. More than 30% of all K-12 public school students nationally, that's between 15 and 16 million, just staggering, live in homes that don't have a device and or stable internet connection in the home. That number jumps to 42% for families of color and 50% for low-income families. Students with learning disabilities, ADHD, and executive functioning issues. I appreciated Delegate Rose's nod to the compounded needs that some of those students have. Often struggle to toggle back and forth between tabs and manage their time. Students with social, emotional, and behavioral health needs are missing out on critical routines and interactions. English language learners may be increasingly isolated from language partners. And I think another factor that is often overlooked in these conversations is the impact of the family and their expectations and beliefs around work and education. So research shows us that there's actually a relationship between parental job loss and negative school performance factors for their children. In a recent AERA study, it's interesting, we were talking about how do we assess the learning loss a few moments ago. So in a recent study, researchers developed some projection models to try to predict the impacts on student achievement loss from prolonged closures. So they drew on research that we already have that examines the significant summer slide that occurs for students and other disruptions like Hurricane Katrina or other sort of unforeseen catastrophes. And the study, which was actually one of the authors was from College Park. The study, which was published in October before this recent spike in positivity rates and resulting school closures we're talking about, it really does provide some sobering projections about the profound learning loss rates. And I think it's really worth noting that these projections don't account for race-based gaps that might result from the higher rates of COVID-19 infections and deaths in the African-American community, the disproportionate impact of the economic crisis on communities of color, and the potential impact of trauma caused by police shootings and media coverage. What we're seeing now, though, is how the disparity of educational opportunity is impacting schools' abilities to respond to COVID and to transition back to in-person learning at all. So returning to in-person learning is made more difficult when your community has rundown school buildings with poor air quality and overcrowded classrooms to begin with. Future funding forecasts must take into account that enrollment is down this year as families have either made the decision to homeschool or to delay kindergarten enrollment, or perhaps were not even able to enroll their students because the enrollment was online. And again, they have limited internet access. ESOL enrollment in Baltimore County, for example, is down by 400 students as compared to last student, despite an expected increase this year. Those students are still out there, they're just not in schools or online. So we should really be prepared for a spike in registration when school buildings reopen and adjust the funding formulas accordingly. At a minimum, we have to eliminate these broadband deserts. Within the context of this conversation, we obviously want to focus on ensuring that students have consistent access to reliable internet, but investing in public-private partnerships, as we've talked about already during this meeting, that expand broadband access will also benefit those teachers that we talked about that have limited access and family members. It's really important that, and I really appreciate Delegate Ebersol mentioning this, to acknowledge that we have teachers who are working from their cars outside of school buildings in order to get online. Additionally, we have to invest in those widespread targeted tutoring or compensatory school programming that has been mentioned already today to ensure that students who have been disproportionately impacted by the COVID slide have targeted interventions to help them regain some of that loss. So next slide. In a typical brick and mortar classroom, teachers monitor student progress. They remind students to stay on track. They pull small groups who need extra support. And with professional development and coaching, teachers can actually learn to leverage technology to meet the needs of diverse learners, but it takes time. Just as a curb cutout that's designed to make a sidewalk accessible for wheelchair users actually makes it easier for everyone to navigate the sidewalk, we should be using similar principles of universal design for learning, otherwise known as UDL, to design learning experiences that proactively meet the needs of all learners. So to do so though, and we've talked about the professional learning needs a little bit today, but we have to invest in substantial and comprehensive training and ongoing coaching and supports, not one and done PD. It's got to be ongoing supports for educators so that they are able to design those lessons that are guided by UDL. They meet web accessibility guidelines, and they allow teachers to monitor progress. We were talking about the need to monitor engagement. There are strategies to do so, but again, that takes a lot of time and coordination. I think we'll go to the next slide. All right. You know, as a teacher educator, I'm obviously focused on the experience of our pre-service teachers whose own learning experiences have absolutely been disrupted because of school closures. Many of my interns have not had the typical opportunities to observe in multiple schools across multiple semesters, culminating with that full-time in-person, internship working alongside their mentor teacher. So we're going to be graduating this year teachers who may have had very few in-building class experiences. So we're, again, kind of going back to that capacity building. We're going to need to support stronger induction and coaching programs. So when we're specifically talking about what the professional needs are, learning needs are, we need to focus on those induction programs for sure. At UMGC, we created mentoring circles. These were comprised of recent graduates, so my spring graduates whose internships were disrupted, current interns, so folks that are in the classroom now, and other interested students and faculty. And these groups have evolved into really powerful professional learning communities where educators from across the state, because remember, we're in a bunch of different districts, are sharing practical solutions to just-in-time challenges. And after hearing Delegate Smith, I want to sort of highlight another pocket of excellence. She asked about promising practices or best practices. MSD is funding a project right now that I'm involved in that is supporting the development of professional learning communities, so general and special educators coming together to identify what are the research-based and evidence-based practices related to online instruction? What do we know about what that looks like for students with disabilities, and to try to call those resources and develop an online toolkit for Maryland educators. So I think these are two examples of how sort of this sudden disruption to the way that we've always done business has actually provided us with some unique opportunities, to work across district lines in ways that maybe we hadn't done before. Our interns right now, despite their disruptions, their learning experience is really valuable. They're developing lessons framed by guidelines of UDL, right? They're already having to think about how to frame these online lessons to meet the needs of all their learners. They have access, so that second picture really speaks to the measure engagement, that little graph right there. That's an analytics, like a user analytics dashboard from a learning management system that we could have access to if we invested in that suite of options with our learning management systems, where you can actually look for red flags in student engagement. So attendance is one thing, but if we can start tracking, this student tends to turn in assignments late, this student is starting to fall behind, here's how many assignments across classes we're having difficulty. That data can actually be collected with technology if we're intentionally seeking out those packages and thinking about how my students who are already using some of that analytic data, which is enabling them to make better data-informed instructional decisions, they're going to carry those skills with them and be prepared to use technology to enhance instruction, even when they're back in buildings. So I didn't want to be all gloom and doom today. I did want to talk about some of the opportunities that have come up, as a result of this disruption. So I had a former colleague that used to start his instructional technology courses by sharing a list of challenges in education. So typical ones be teacher shortages, overcrowded schools. He would then ask students to solve the problem with technology. So invariably, these pre-service teachers would come up with creative solutions, things like having schools broadcast instruction across schools or even districts, so that, for example, a physics teacher in Somerset County could help address a teacher shortage in Wycomico by, zooming into that classroom. So I think I'm going to wrap up soon, but I want to really remind us that rather than rushing back to the way we've always done things, this is really an important time to acknowledge that the status quo, as we spent the whole beginning of this meeting talking about, was not working for all of our learners. Next slide. So as I said, we have the opportunity and I would dare say the obligation to learn from this crisis. We really need to support initiatives to expand broadband internet. We need to invest in targeted or compensatory programming to make sure that we are meeting the needs of the students that were disproportionately impacted by this crisis. We can leverage partnerships with universities. I mean, we're here because we want to be partners, and we can fund widespread professional learning so that we can explore some of those creative solutions to those ongoing challenges. So in that spirit of collaboration, I'm going to pass the mic off to my colleague, Ryan Schaaf, if that's okay, or Chairman, if you want to stop for questions now, that's fine as well.
No, we can go, you can keep going until everybody has spoken.
All right.
All right, thanks for having me. Could we go to the next slide, please? All right, so let me go ahead and begin by just starting with my background. So my background is in digital age learning, game-based learning, and education reform. So I've written 7 books on future-focused teaching and learning topics. More importantly, I love my job. I love to prepare educators to teach students for today and tomorrow, and not yesterday or yesteryear. This entire situation with the pandemic hit home for my wife and I. So this is Connor's the tall one. He's 13 now, and that's Ben. He's 7. They're sporting their pandemic dues there. Our new normal wasn't normal at all. My children, along with many others, had to abandon the physical school buildings they loved. They were unable to visit friends and extended family. They had to share a home with 2 working adults during a global crisis. And they had to do this with the uncertainty of their continued health and well-being. During the pandemic, teachers were the glue of society. While the brave doctors, the nurses, and the frontline workers combated the virus, teachers also never abandoned their posts. Despite being scared for themselves and their families, despite many lacking essential tools and training to shift to 100% online learning, despite this so-called new normal, they provided the best instruction they could. They were rock stars, okay? Please don't ever forget that. During the rest of this briefing, please understand these following takeaways. Please switch the slide. The current system of education was developed in the late 19th century, before the first computer, before women could vote, before the first airplane took off at Kitty Hawk. Using principles of scientific management, we cram a small city of children into mostly old buildings with no space and poor circulation. Like factories, schools required learners to be present in a brick and mortar space. Our curriculums, our organizational strategies, our methods of teaching and assessment were developed over a period of 125 years ago, and they're geared towards face-to-face learning. It was a productive system geared towards the students and situations of yesteryear. Slide, please. Then COVID hit and showed us that our education system was not cut out for such a rapid transformation. This left learners, parents, educators, and leaders very little time to slap together a new model, a new system. I call it triaged instruction. Okay. Many are trying to duplicate the old model of school into remote instruction and are discovering this is like cramming a square peg into a round hole. It's just not compatible. Slide, please. As we help schools manage this current crisis, there are numerous truths we must all embrace. Slide. First, digital is different. Distance learning should not be forced to try and replace the instructional approaches of face-to-face instruction. Online learning can be very successful when the proper art of teaching and learning are employed. Elmore indicates that between 80 to 85% of the work learners do in classrooms today continue to focus on factual recall and low-level procedural thinking. This is the type of information that worksheets cover. This is the type of information that a Google search app or artificial intelligence can do quickly and without error. Slide, please. A great deal of information we learn, we lose. What remains built into our cognition are the skills and processes we can learn and reuse in most higher level thinking tasks. The first is interpersonal skills. We have to focus on instruction that focuses on the internal skills, perceptions, and attitudes that occur within our person's mind. Okay. Next is interpersonal skills. Okay. Interpersonal abilities have to do with understanding and comprehending external situations and being able to communicate with others. Next is problem-solving skills. Problem-solving involves students learning a structured mental process that allows them to independently solve complete and complex problems in real time. Collaboration skills involves work that's working together to accomplish a common purpose, okay? The power of we is greater than the power of me. Information analysis skills. In a time of unreliable sources, we don't want learners who simply consume and regurgitate information without first questioning, analyzing, and validating the reliability of what they just read and saw online or in books. Next is information presentation skills. Learners are growing up in a participatory and sharing culture, called the YouTube era. Learners must know how to use this knowledge to effectively communicate information to others. Next is creativity skills. Creativity is about how you imaginatively communicate new ideas. Finally, global citizenship skills. It's an absolute imperative to develop highly ethical, moral citizens who conduct themselves appropriately in both real world and digital settings. Global citizenship is about protecting yourself, protecting others, and protecting the work of others in both the real and online worlds. Slide, please. Distance learning requires equitable access to high-speed internet, instructionally valid devices, and a rich digital landscape with robust learning tools, apps, and services to engage learners. It's different than face-to-face learning. Okay, it must be designed and executed purposefully, using enough time, people, and resources to be successful. It's successful when educators receive enough training, time, and compensation to execute a well-developed plan. Distance learning is not a packet of worksheets. It's not meant to be a digital babysitter. It's not, distance learning is not a time to look for pre-produced or pre-canned learning solutions built by such companies like as Pearson or Kaplan or other corporate entities. At Notre Dame, we have an ACES program. It's an academic program for Catholic educators, in which we perform a lot of professional development. We have a network of dozens of schools throughout the Baltimore, Washington area. We also have a rich PDS program, professional development schools, where we actually have prospective teachers and teachers in training, where we're actually, we did a complete change to help address our learners and help them prepare for this type of remote instruction, helping them to support the teachers that were already in the field. And we're also reaching out to a lot of different schools and offering them free professional development, so this way they can reach students where they are. So I want to turn over this presentation to Dr. Shockley. Could I please have the next slide for Dr. Shockley?
Thank you very much. Thank you for everyone for what you shared, and thank you for having us and allowing us to present today. My name is Ebony Terrell Shockley, and I'm a former PK-12 STEM literacy ESOL educator. I also served as an instructional technology specialist and taught online and hybrid well before coming into higher education. Currently, I'm an associate clinical professor and executive director of teacher education at the University of Maryland, College Park. I designed our digital learning tools course that many of our teacher education students take, And I should note that all of our teacher candidates compose a portfolio that supports experiences and the development of skills to engage their own learners in critical thinking, design, creativity, and collaborative problem solving, as well as to responsibly participate in the digital world in the ways that the colleagues before me foreshadowed earlier. Next slide, please. So I'll start with the ways that we've been successful based on our criteria with preparing teacher candidates in a virtual environment. So we have avatars, which we use to engage interns in simulations as a vehicle to support the realities of PK-12 learning. We also have, see my slide, micro-teaching, which is really important and used in other fields. Micro-teaching is a development technique whereby the interns review a recording of a teaching session. Right now, that's mostly a peer teaching experience because of barriers in virtual spaces, but they record their PK-12 learners, and they use an experience of a lesson segment in order to receive constructive feedback from peers. You also see case studies listed and professional development network. So I'll talk about case studies. We use those so that our teacher candidates have examples of the lived experiences that some of my colleagues mentioned earlier, and to really understand the brick and mortar space, because as mentioned, many of our teacher candidates have not yet had a brick and mortar teaching experience. The Professional Development Network and the Mentor Teaching Academy are both in their initial stages. So these are actually both funded projects with our partners. So the University of Maryland College Park is in the initial stages of leading a professional development network focused on remote teaching for teachers. And the network includes a training model of a cohort of teacher leader coaches who understand and provide district leadership for the implementation of effective hybrid and online learning. And that is funded by the GEAR grant, or the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund. And then the Mentor Teacher Academy, Monica shared the Mentor Teacher Circles, which are going really well. I've heard so many great things about that. Similarly, there's a Mentor Teacher Academy happening at the University of Maryland College Park with partner districts where there's a collaborative design for implementing the skills that in-service teachers will need to advance. Next slide, please. So partnerships, of course, are critical. I just shared 2 examples of a partnership with the Mentor Teacher Academy and the Professional Development Network. The partnerships are important because they really help us understand what the issues are. And I believe that this topic has come up already, but the partnerships, you'll see the PK-12 schools, our partnerships with PK-12 schools really outline for us some of the challenges, as well as listening to families, collaborating with other IHEs, and then looking to businesses. We are all basically depending on each other to help solve some of the problems that the pandemic has really laid bare. For example, many are fiscal in nature, like hotspots for teacher candidates trying to learn how to teach remotely, students with limited access, as we mentioned. Of course, those have cost, as well as some of the hardware that is needed in like multi-generational households where audio will be important. We understand that many of the public library spaces that teachers and families used to draw upon for a computer or for internet access have limited hours right now. And so we talked about funding formulas previously, and I really think that we would benefit from a new funding formula that helps us address some of the shortages. So those are some of the challenges that we have learned about because of the benefit of our partners outlined here. Next slide, please. So we've talked about best practices or promising practices. The information on this slide comes from culling the research and some of the meta-analysis on evidence-based practices. Of course, these are not practices that have been studied in a pandemic, and so I want to make sure that I'm clear about that. But the practices that we've seen from the evidence and from the literature are listed here. So we talked about micro-teaching earlier, the visual scaffolding, which helps direct attention to important learning materials and to help guide learners' cognitive processes. online activities to create faculty-student relationships and reduce the isolation that can occur in a virtual learning space, as there are limited opportunities for some, especially of our teacher candidates. Many of them working independently. Interactive strategies to promote student-to-student relationships, also critical. The social engagement, both for our PK-12 environments as well as for our teacher candidates who are expected to have some peer-to-peer engagement to enhance their skills. Social engagement is also really critical in the early childhood research, as well as the adolescent development research. There was a question earlier about culturally responsive instruction. We are focused very much on targeted and rigorous culturally responsive instruction to reach all learners, our culturally, academically, and linguistically diverse learners, and also alternating our high and low intensity activities. Ongoing solicited feedback, I think, is really important because it's difficult to detect challenges in a virtual space. Often teacher candidates are taught to or prepared to really have look-fors that would happen in a brick and mortar space. And so the ongoing solicited feedback helps identify what used to be possible in an in-person interaction by examining posture and expression, for example. Next slide, please. So there are opportunities, right? Someone mentioned earlier, we don't only want to talk about sort of the bad parts of it, but really thinking about, well, what can we do moving forward? And in today's digital world, finding new ways to engage students and increase their understanding and improve their knowledge retention is ever more difficult as we struggle with the disruptive change. But here are some ideas about moving forward and getting back to better. So increasing the use of digitized model lessons and to promote innovation and innovative teaching methods, and really thinking about the neurodiversity among our learners, our exceptional learners, our individuals, our students who are receiving special education and related services, and our English learners and speakers of various language varieties and dialects, in order to appropriately accommodate learner differences and promote an asset-based orientation to their perspectives. There's an opportunity to reimagine programs to employ, futuristic pedagogies. For example, providing an augmented reality experience. And then thinking about program design and the ways that a micro-credential offering could support in-service and pre-service teachers. So the reason that Expand M-Learning, you'll see that at the top is listed, is because of some data that came from the Pew Research Center that states that about 96% of individuals in the US have cell phone access. And so M-Learning is an opportunity to really think about ways to augment and expand some of the teaching platforms that we're using. But let's be clear, all cell phones are not smartphones. So certainly that would require resources, but it is certainly an opportunity for us to advance our knowledge. Next slide, please. So we had the opportunity to poll our peers to really understand the landscape of virtual learning across the state. And so you'll see here access to resource for PK-12 learners that has been discussed previously. Access, we have support and leadership from IHEs. We have institutions of higher education that are helping with book drops and supporting deliveries and resources and resource distribution to partner with our PK-12 learners. And then we have navigating virtual environments, having the knowledge. There was conversation earlier about how are teachers prepared to really engage their learners and to make sure that they are meeting the needs of their learners. And so many of the institutions of higher education around the state have spent resources to make sure that their faculty have acquired Google Classroom knowledge, Quality Matters certification, all kinds of different platform certification, Blackboard, for example, as well, just to make sure that they are able to meet the need of their learners. And they have done that work in partnership with our PK-12 schools and districts. And then you have virtual professional development and professional development. So how to deploy professional development had also been a challenge. And our IHEs certainly stepped up to meet that challenge. A couple of IHEs also shared, institutions of higher education shared their work with supporting professional development well into the induction year, which is the first induction years, which is the first few years for our teacher candidates. Something that is really important, all of it's important, but another presenter shared socio-emotional health. So we're not just talking about learning. You cannot have learning without wellness. And so with that, some of our programs around the state of Maryland have offered socio-emotional support in their school counseling program and their school psychology program, offering services such as teletherapy. And then to summarize, the final challenge, or the one that I'll mention, having access to schools has not been an easy feat because of the parameters and the guidelines that districts are putting in place to secure their platforms and their learners. And so to meet that challenge, some of the things that our IHEs have done is offered tutoring, remote observation and supervision. To be clear, this is not enough. Again, there's power in numbers, literally, and certainly opportunity to continue this work together. As I mentioned, we get back to better. Thank you.
Thank you. I did see a few questions in the chat. I'm gonna ask, I did see one. So Delegate Guyton, did you want to ask your question? You're muted right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did put a comment question in the chair, but in the chat, I don't think it's appropriate to spend a lot of time on today, given our time restraints, but I would love to look at broadband access in the future, in the near future if we can, because we really aren't seeing progress, at least in my district, since school closed on that issue. So kids just aren't accessing it, and some teachers aren't either. So I would like to put that on another agenda maybe. But my question is actually for Dr. Simonson. I really am excited about hearing about the toolkit that you're developing for MSDE regarding special education during virtual learning. I mean, that's an area I work in a lot and have heard a lot of concerns from parents. I guess I'm interested in how that relates to teacher preparation, particularly between now and when we go back, and then actually when we go back. Because we know that we're going to have to evaluate and assess for remediation and compensatory services. And there's a lot of argument about when that should be done, whether it should be done virtually or whether it needs to happen after schools are back in the classroom. I hear that debate a lot, even in our county. Do you have a recommendation on that? And can you tell us how new teachers and teachers who were teaching years before the pandemic are being prepared to go back into a classroom that's going to require a whole lot more remediation of all students, and also behavioral issues that we know are on their way that they may not have seen before at these levels?
Okay, so I think there were a couple questions.
There's a lot of
there.
stuff.
That's okay, and I'll do my best. And then I really want my colleagues to jump in too, because they might have the right answer, the answer you're looking for. So in terms of when to assess, so at the risk of upsetting Delegate Eversole, who was talking about not wanting to invest a lot of energy, not wanting to waste teaching time, right? Not wanting to take away from that critical short window we have. I believe that we can start collecting data now. We have information about how students are doing, even if we're using a metric, a faulty metric of grades, right? We have at least some examples of sort of how people are meeting the metrics that we have. In order to really know how a student is going to do in the natural setting of the classroom, we actually have to have a situational assessment of what it looks like in the classroom. But we have some sort of formative data along the way to say, okay, so we know that students are not attending classes. We know that they're failing their classes. We know that they're not submitting assignments, or that they're not performing well, and start to develop some intermediate interventions now. I think it has to be multi-pronged. I mean, it has to be, a tiered approach. The other question was related to how we're preparing educated pre-service teachers. So Dr. Shockley shared a number of examples of the ways that we're leveraging technology to try to simulate as best as possible the learning environment. And as someone who has taught online for a decade, I really believe that there are some things that I can do better online than I could do in person. Not all, but there are some things I can do better online. And so we're going to do our very best to support teachers in the space that we have and leverage all those technologies like we talked about. But when they go back into the classroom, none of us know what it's going to look like. We know we're going to inherit all these other compounded issues. So what I really think is that it has to be a significant investment in long-term coaching and support and induction for those teachers. We can't place and pray. That's not going to be enough. So really thinking about the PD instead of just a bunch of workshops, coaching programs, mentoring programs, co-teaching models, right? Where you're not the only person in the classroom because suddenly you have a whole host of issues that you weren't prepared for. So I think, as we've talked about a bunch of times through here, this is an opportunity to rethink things, and to say, if some of those students that are most disproportionately effective, that have been impacted significantly, if we are ready to go into a school building in the summer, we need to figure out how to make that happen for some cases, for some students, right? We can have some targeted tutoring like we talked about early, do some of that work ahead of time. Don't wait till the after Labor Day arbitrary deadline.
Thank you.
And I will say, for the record, the Bridge to Kerwin bill that we passed a couple of years ago does provide funding to LEAs for direct tutoring to students, and some of our LEAs are using it correctly, others are not. But it's important that we do targeting tutoring for students and include some summertime in there as well for struggling learners. Ms. Shockley, I have a question for you. Dr. Shockley, excuse me, Shockley. I have a question for you. One of my friends is he's a principal in Baltimore County, and he's also a graduate of the University of Maryland Teaching School. And he came back to the school and actually spoke to some of the students there. And one of the things he spoke about one of the things he told me behind closed doors was, there was not a lot of people that looked like him and I, which are Black African-American folks. And so I wanted to know from you, and you spoke to training teachers on cultural competency and linguistics and things of that nature to be able to connect with them. How do we attract teachers? How do we attract students to the teaching profession, in your opinion? But then also, how do we retain them into the teaching in the school so they can graduate and then become teachers too? Can you speak to that for me?
I can absolutely speak to that. Thank you for your question. So there are a couple of studies that are underway. One is happening on campus right now, where we're actually asking students, would you become a teacher? Why would you become a teacher? Why wouldn't you become a teacher? To really understand right now, this generation, the students who are on campus right now, understanding their response to that question. So the diversity question is very important. We have restructured our scholarship allocation model to include first-generation college students, which we find really diversifies our pool and really reduces some of the barriers that our students face. We've also launched what's called a middle college program with a large school district. And in that school district, students can move into teaching after earning an AAT degree. And so given the diversity of that district, that's another way that we're diversifying our teacher candidate pool to be more reflective of the PK-12 population in the state. There are also lots of myths about, what it means to be a teacher. And so putting the right people in front of the students is really important. And so we've done that with the resources that we pulled for recruitment to talk to students about, what are the realities? And when we offer them, the realities, and we provide for them real experiences that are evidence-based or promising practices, we do find that based on the feedback that we receive from our alumni network, like your friend, for example, that those strategies really help them in the long haul. But in terms of the barriers, there are just lots of myths about, teacher salaries, or lots of myths about, what it means to be a teacher and what it takes to be a teacher. So we've been, upfront and real and talked about all of the benefits. I believe it is the best profession in the world, and we target it, we advertise it in that way. So I just talked to 60 high school students this past Friday in that middle school college program that we're moving into teaching. And it's in Prince George's County, by the way.
Would you mind terribly if I offered up one other?
Let me just ask a quick follow-up question.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. Can you just tell me what that middle, I think the middle college, what jurisdiction is that in? I see you kind of slid that under a little bit. Can you tell me where that middle college is?
Oh, I didn't mean to slide it under. I'm very proud. Okay. So let me say it again loudly. Yeah. The middle college program, there are media reports coming out about it. And it is a pipeline program. It's a grow your own program that a school district and the University of Maryland College Park.
What is that? What is that school district?
Prince George's County Public Schools.
Okay, that's what I wanted to get at.
I didn't know if you heard me. So it's Prince George's County Public Schools, yes. Okay. And it is a pipeline program. It's a grow your own program where high school students earn an AAT degree, and then they come in as juniors to the University of Maryland College Park. And so, awesome. And those are just a few. For the purpose of brevity, I won't lay them out, but those are some of the main ones.
Well, we can talk offline because I would love to hear more about what we can do. Miss Dr. Simonson.
It's okay. Yeah, no, I just wanted to tag on real quickly that one of the other barriers to sort of opening up the teaching profession for anyone, and particularly students that have been from disinvested communities themselves, is the cost for sure, but certainly you can take a lot of your classes part-time, but then when you get to that full-time teaching internship, you're actually being asked to take time off of work, right? You're not, it's really a financial hardship. And so I do think while we're talking to this committee, it would be remiss of us not to say that we should probably, especially now that our teaching workforce is shrinking, we really need to be thinking about investing in scholarships to allow people to invest in their internship opportunities.
I totally agree. We have a teaching scholarship at the state that we created, and I think it doesn't do enough to attract teachers, to attract students of color and first generation college students to the teaching profession. I think we should change that. So thank you both, and Dr. Schaaf as well. Thank you all for your presentations, and we really appreciate it. I didn't see any other questions lined up. If I missed you, you have lost your opportunity to ask a question of these great people. But if you can send us the links to some of the documents that you guys have provided to us, we really appreciate it. And thank you all for being here. Next, we will hear from some of the public members, or from members of the public, on their perceptions and realities of virtual learning, of distance learning. And we're going to start first off with Jana Parker for 3 minutes, and then we'll go to the next speaker. Ms. Parker.
Good day. So people of color, specifically Black and Brown families, have a greater risk of falling behind in education during this pandemic because pre-existing inequities within education have further exacerbated by the other issues brought on and magnified by COVID-19. Education is the bedrock and foundation of our society, and in one part of our community falls by the wayside in regards to receiving quality education that works to erode the stability and growth within our community within the state of Maryland. As a proud resident of Prince George's County, Maryland, a county that is majority people of color, and a former educator, I wanted to ensure that all possible protections on the state and local level are taken for Black and Brown students within my county and throughout the state as it relates to their education. The presentations that you heard earlier during your meeting thoroughly discussed the very important points that I hope the subcommittee utilizes within their work. In alignment with those recommendations, my testimony echoes their sentiments. I would encourage you to consider how to provide electronics in high poverty communities and work with internet companies to provide vast communications for those communities, require specific and routine data collection in regards to educational practice and analytics. Consider giving stimulus funds directly to school systems for additional supports, providing funds for continuous training of students, parents, teachers as it relates to managing technology and cultural competency within education, ensuring that there are monies available for intensive one-on-one academic supports, as well as how to appropriately extend the school year to make up for academic loss, providing in-depth support to high schoolers who are transitioning out of the school system, as well as providing more areas and layers of communication between families and school systems. I'm requesting that this subcommittee consider those and other recommendations you heard as you move forward in creating policy and legislation that will affect the future of your younger constituents immediately and the rest of our great state of Maryland in the future. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Next, we'll have Mr. Nathan Stone.
Good afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity to speak about the challenges of online education as I am a parent and a teacher in Wacomico County. First, from the teacher side, I would like to say that in 2020, every single teacher in the state is a first-year teacher relearning how to teach from scratch. I have personally learned 8 new online educational platforms. In addition to fitting state curriculum and testing requirements in the new county timelines, I've had to become proficient enough where I can not only use the websites, I can teach my students how to use it from their end as well. Students may be able to navigate social media, but they have very little knowledge of educational platforms. The amount of grading and time grading student work has absolutely exploded because we can't rely on a nod or body language anymore from students or a quick student check-in. Teachers have had to pay out-of-pocket expenses on office chairs, desks, extra monitors, headsets, cameras, printers, and scanners, online platform subscriptions, and better internet to turn their homes into workable classrooms. Teachers all over the state have done this without tax breaks or stimulus checks. I can also speak, as I said, from the parent side. Keeping up with my own children's grades can take an enormous amount of time because they do miss assignments, yes, because of issues with attention spans, of course, but also because of lagging internet, spotty audio, teachers making mistakes in how they post assignments. Some miss because they have family doctor's appointments and younger students can't be left alone at home. Most parents cannot work from home. Parents have to take their kids' word that when they are doing the online work, they're actually doing it. Many families do not have access to reliable internet, which has been discussed here, or don't have enough capacity to carry 4 or 5 devices at one time, or even have enough devices in the house that are available. I had a student log into class on their phone while their parent was driving to Boston to visit their sick mother, and they apologized profusely that they couldn't participate in the day's lesson. Many students and families are fighting like mad, going into debt, making long-term sacrifices to keep their kids online in school during this absolutely grueling pandemic. Formative school years are difficult enough without throwing all of these challenges at kids. And please do not think for one second that I think we should go back to school in person, and I don't even think we should go back hybrid. While we all yearn for normal, there is nothing normal about opening schools up and then closing them down over and over again, disrupting what schedules kids have in place and forcing parents to scramble work hours and childcare plans. There is nothing normal about having to quarantine for 2 weeks in your own home because someone at school might have been exposed to the virus. There is nothing normal about teachers coming into schools to literally risk their lives and their families' lives to provide IEP accommodations or provide assistance for our lowest performing students. There's nothing normal about the teacher who is perhaps the only constant adult figure in some of our kids' lives getting sick and dying. This is not a normal time. And we as teachers are being asked to provide that rock of normalcy and stability, not only for our own families and kids, but for parents and students all across our neighborhoods and communities statewide. I think I speak for most educators when I say it would be amazing if our elected officials would publicly recognize our hard work and sacrifice we are making and parents on a daily basis instead of referring to us as lazy and not wanting to do our jobs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Next speaker we'll have is Diallo Sessions.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for this opportunity. A lot of my comments will center around digital divide, and it'll support some of the things that have already been said. And the first one is I'm in support of universal broadband because the internet has passed the tipping point of being a critical resource in the lives of Americans. We need to be able to freely access internet like we do roads and highways. And the internet must be robust so that student participation is not interrupted, as you heard Mr. Stone just mention about dropouts of audio and video and things like that. Second, public spaces are often used, but they can have restrictions on students that want to pursue certain interests that they have because of filters at public schools or public libraries. And also there may be threats in, like if I'm in a cafe or Starbucks, people may be sniffing out my Wi-Fi and my information. Then there are certain advantages to having home broadband, first of which is the opportunity to participate in formal learning experiences which goes along with the whole COVID situation and how some students couldn't participate, and we had to do what Dr. Schaaf mentioned that we shouldn't do, which is send out a bunch of packets and worksheets. The opportunity to participate in informal learning experiences, because the internet, as we know, it does have a lot of bad information, but it has a lot more, in my opinion, that people can use to build their own skills. And then I'm borrowing some information from this book called The Digital Edge, How Black and Latino Youth Navigate the Digital Divide. And the researchers here found a couple of interesting things, that teens are more likely to develop richer forms of online social capital when they have access to broadband in the home. And then they're also more likely to become content producers rather than merely consumers, which we do a lot of. Consuming is part of it, but it's so far skewed to the side of consuming everything that people give us that we lose out on this idea that kids and teachers can be producers and creators. And then the final point is access. And this is having access to resources such as YouTube or anything where you can learn new things. And then second, more knowledgeable others, meaning people that have skills that you don't have or can't access within your community. The internet can offer things like that. Thank you for the time to share my thoughts.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Mr. Sessions. Okay, our next speaker will be Mr. Ricardo Manderson.
Good afternoon, members of the subcommittee. My name is Ricardo. I am community member from Baltimore City. I'd like to speak on the need for increased funding in counseling services for schools. So nationally, everyone knows that there's an increase in depression and anxiety amongst kids since the beginning of COVID. In June, the CDC reported that young people were the hardest hit group of any during the COVID crisis, and suicide from that same report has been reported to be up 11% of all the people considered. And the troubling thing about this is that most of the young people had already been on a trajectory for rising suicide rates every year since 2007. That's been the leading cause of death among young people, next to accidents among people ages 10 to 24 since then. Locally in Baltimore, we already had issues with mental health. We already had traumatic environments where kids were witnessing murders and such, and needed services that, went beyond the typical school environment. Recently, there was a WBFF report, Fox 45, that noted a young lady in a community that borders mine. I was actually on the steering committee for the school's merger, and the kid's mom was murdered, and her school's closed now. And now she is in an environment where she no longer has a teacher that she knows. She no longer has the counselor she knows, and she's going to a learning center, and she doesn't have the supports necessary, so she's struggling. Numerous children across this city and across the state are dealing with family members that have died because of COVID. In Baltimore, of course, there's murders, but in other parts of the state, everyone's dealing with these same crises. Children are dealing with financial concerns such as evictions and issues with food insecurities. So these kids have all these other compounding issues that are affecting their ability to learn. The counselor that normally works at my own daughter's school in her gifted class hasn't reached out this year, where they did reach out last year. And that type of stuff is due to funding availability. COVID has exacerbated issues for children in Baltimore. The need now is much greater than before. More counselors are needed as issues go beyond the already identified problems of violence and poverty. We have to incorporate the fact that these kids are not isolated. We have to incorporate the fact that
Mr. Manderson,
I'm sorry?
Can you summarize, please?
Yes.
Your time is up.
Okay, I'm sorry. So basically, I would like you all to move towards solutions. One, make sure that it's properly funded, but also override the governor's veto of the blueprint for Maryland's future, which would create historic investments for behavioral health services and those wraparound services needed, and don't allow cuts to education in the state budget this year.
Thank you, Mr. Manderson. Appreciate what you said today, and thank you so much for your support. We're going to go next to Mr. Timothy Stock.
Thank you. Thank you for convening this meeting on teaching through virtual education. I want to extend gratitude to our teachers and the staff at Pinehurst Elementary School in Wicomico County. They are passionate and capable professionals working under extremely different conditions. I want to keep my comments brief, so I will focus on the ways in which virtual instruction has not been a success for our children. Our commitment to public education is strong. However, our family has been exhausted by the demands of maintaining 2 jobs while acting as part-time instructors. We have every possible advantage in our home. We have income, we have reliable internet, and we have enough comfortable working space. If we were to lack any of those things, we would not be able to participate in virtual learning as currently practiced. These comments are in the context of a family that has every possible advantage and that one can have in the current global crisis. Many children in our district do not share these advantages. The first and most heartrending gap that virtual education represents is a lack of social development and an inability to recreate the social aspects of learning. Our children who are in the 4th and the 2nd grade learn most from their peers and from the social process of engagement. Instruction is at the heart of this, which is an art that our teaching professionals practice, but it is also a process of discovery of the life and contributions that our children can make to each other's development. This is particularly pronounced with our youngest son, who is 7 years old. Despite making his academic targets, his motivation to participate in online learning is incredibly low, and his desire to attend in-person school grows more pressing with every passing week. I hope that the future of remote learning plan can have the goal of targeted reopening for younger grades, especially pre-K and up to 2nd grade, as the highest priority. Even 1 day a week of in-school instruction can have a positive and multiplying effect. These are future learners whose experience of school is increasingly one of isolation, frustration, and endlessly confusing interfaces and logins. Which leads me to my second point. A technology-based learning is neither socially nor developmentally appropriate for children of a young age. A focus on paying attention and cameras on can only lead to burnout and frustration. As parents, we feel very isolated and placed in a position of enforcing a model of learning for our children that is not always effective, but always generates frustration. A good virtual learning environment would represent a focus on well-being, flexibility, breaks, multiple pathways to attendance, even to the point of modifying the role of attendance and funding metrics, and a pause in standardized testing and assessment. Assessment tools or attendance tracking, if embedded in technology or with a strong instructional justification, can be useful. But if they have the purpose of jury-rigging the current crisis into an inadequate school funding scheme, then the focus should not be on the accountability of families, students, and teachers, but on the priorities and flexibility of school policy and administration. Our learners need to eat well, have a predictable schedule that balances a minimum of Zoom time with a maximum of flexibility, provide support, a focus on a safe return to school that is targeted and sustainable, and greater thought, planning, and energy into offsite learning centers and access to the internet. What virtual learning has taught me is that we have a long way to go to fully integrating our schools into our community. I disagree with the focus on attendance, compliance, and assessment in the regular school environment. If the current environment, we have seen mass disengagement and a large gap between the schoolhouse and the community it serves. Please consider a student-focused approach with targeted, sustainable reopening, flexibility, and satisfying work requirements according to a wide range of schedules, and the imperative to meet families and students where they are. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Stock. We appreciate that. And I believe that was the last comment of today. And so we want to thank all of our speakers today. And obviously, I want to thank our members for meeting with us. And just want to say thank you to all the teachers that are out there that are teaching our students right now doing virtual learning. And thank you to the students, like the one that we just saw in Delegate Jones's picture, and Delegate Ebersol's for trying so hard to make sure they maintain focus and learn in this global pandemic. So thank you all. And I'm gonna ask our subcommittee members if you all can stay on, and if we can stop the recording publicly, but be able to talk without the recording.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Delegate Rose, can you stay on for a second? Hey, Sarah, can you let us know when we're no longer live?
Yes, I'm just checking with OIS.
I thought it was a great presentation, some great information from it, right? We can talk about that right now, at least.
A lot of concerns.
Yeah, definitely a lot of concerns, but I think we got some answers today, honestly. So I'm happy about that, and I think we all have the same common goal of